Hey guys, hope you're doing well. We're going to start our new unit on factors of natural selection. To me, this is a really cool topic. As a biology major in college, this was one of the most interesting topics that I learned about. And one of the quotes that I always remember uh, up on the up on the wall in one of my biology classrooms in college was this one right here, that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. So, in the 1850s, when Darwin came up with his idea of evolution um, by natural selection, there was a lot of people at the time that were a little leery of it. They didn't think that it happened that way. But as we found out more and more evidence, as we looked at his work in the 1950s and 60s, when we started figuring out how DNA works, um, we made huge strides in understanding biology and understanding humans and understanding animals and understanding things like diseases. Um, we understand genetics so much now that we can take a take a gene from a fish and put it into a tomato, and those tomatoes are able to survive cold weather better. So when we started to understand how evolution works, biology makes a lot more sense. So we're going to go through the four factors of natural selection and quickly to talk about what the difference is with natural and artificial selection. This picture does a really good job of showing you what the difference is. So we've got our bug that looks like a leaf. Over time, that bug had there's tons of bugs. They had tons of variations, and the ones that looked a little more like a leaf got eaten less, so they had babies, and so on and so on until we get this bug that literally looks like a leaf. So this is natural selection. Nature is dictating that. On the other hand, artificial selection is when humans decide traits that they like, and this is a great example of this. As this pug who has this smashed-in face, um, humans decided that that was useful for some reason, and uh, we have this thing. Um, with a lot of our dogs, with a lot of the artificial selection we've done with dogs, we see a lot of problems with it, especially in some of these pure breeds like this. Like this guy has huge problems breathing. So artificial selection, humans do it. It usually happens very, very quickly. Natural selection is based on nature. Typically, natural selection is going to take a long time, but it can also happen pretty quickly. All right, so the four factors of natural selection, and you'll have a quiz on this later, is differential, survivorship and reproduction, variation, inheritance, and adaptations. So let's go through those four and talk about them. So differential, survivorship, and reproduction. If we want to break it down, some organisms are better at surviving than others. So if you can survive, that means you have a better chance of making babies, producing offspring. And so that means your DNA, whatever made you you, is being passed along because you were better at surviving. Maybe you were better at surviving because you were smarter and knew not to chase after that saber-toothed tiger. Um, maybe you had a better idea of what plants you shouldn't eat. So survival allows you to pass your genes on. And then on the other hand, for the reproduction part, some organisms are really good at reproduction, and thus their genes will get passed along in higher amounts. So we have like if we want to take dogs for example, we have dogs that have litters of one puppy, and we have some dogs that can have litters up to eight, nine, maybe even 10 puppies. Um, so the ones that have bigger litters or are able to reproduce quicker or able to have offspring that are better able to survive from the beginning, um, those are the ones that are going to pass on their genes. Those are the ones that we're going to see most often. So First huge major part of natural selection is just, can you survive and can you reproduce? Because if you do that better, then your genes are going to get passed along. The second one that has to happen for natural selection to occur is for variation to exist. So in every population, there is variation. At least we hope so. If not, that's a problem. So those variations have the potential to make a group of organisms more or less able to survive and reproduce. Um, if we look at something like polar bear has uh, some really cool adaptations, and we'll talk about adaptations later, but it has some really good adaptations um, that allow it to survive in its climate. There, at one time, there were polar bears that had uh, fur that was white and some that had fur that was darker, like a brownish color. The ones that were white, the ones that had that variation, were able to hunt better. They were able to blend into their surroundings. They were able to get more food. They're the ones that survived, reproduced, and passed those genes on. We don't see brown polar bears anymore because that is not a useful gene. We use dogs again with variation. We have our wolf ancestor. Dogs were domesticated from the wolf ancestor, and as you see, we had a ton of variation within dogs. There's tons of dog breeds, so there's lots and lots and lots of variation. Variation is very crucial in survival. If you have bigger amounts of variation, the likelihood that that population is going to go extinct is pretty low. Third part of natural selection is inheritance. Parents with advantageous traits must pass those traits onto their offspring in order for natural selection to act. This makes sense. If the parents have really cool traits, some awesome mutation, but they can't pass it on, then it's meaningless because it goes nowhere. It stops with them. Um, One of the best examples of this is our Cyclops man. So, Cyclops man, this is a fake made up story. But Cyclops man, he was born kind of ugly, obviously, very ugly. But Cyclops man, he was really good at baseball. That one eyeball in the middle of his head, he could see. He had like 25 vision. He could see where the ball was coming off the bat um, far earlier than any other baseball player ever, and so he was able to move in the outfield, and he was an amazing defensive player. He's also a great offensive player. He knew where the pitch was going. That eye was amazing. So Mr. Cyclops man was a multimillionaire baseball player. However, he had problems with the ladies. Anytime he would go out on a date, it would end pretty quickly. So Mr. Cyclops man, he had an extremely advantageous trait, but it didn't get passed on. It stopped with him because he could never find anybody to mate with. So that's a kind of a stupid story, but it just goes to show that traits have to be passed on, even if it's an amazing trait. If the parents can't have offspring or healthy offspring, it goes absolutely nowhere. Our fourth one is adaptations. Um, these are just characteristics that are going to increase the chance of survival. We use humans for this one. So the human pelvis is unique. It allows us to be bipedal and walk around on two legs. There are very, very few other animals that can do this. Birds are one, but there's very few animals that are actually 100% bipedal all the time. This gives us a lot of advantages, and this might be the reason why that humans were able to adapt and evolve into the technological powerhouses that we are. It could be something simple as the hips which maybe helped our brain capacity. So that's an example of a very advantageous adaptation. So an example we'll go through, and then we'll talk about the 4 factors of evolution for natural selection that work with this. So our example is the tuskless elephants. So typically, only 2 to 6% of elephants are born without tusks. However, in one population in Mozambique, 33% of female elephants do not have tusks. This is weird because tusks are absolutely useful for elephants, pretty much crucial for them to survive well. If you're an elephant and you don't have tusks, you have less chance of surviving. But for some reason, in this population in Mozambique, we have a ton of elephants that don't have tusks. So the question is, let's look at natural selection and figure out what the heck is going on. So our first one, our big one, differential, survivorship, and reproduction. These elephants in Mozambique during a civil war in the area, a lot of these elephants were hunted for their ivory. They were poached for their ivory. So elephants that had tusks, even though those tusks are very useful for them to dig holes and knock over things and do all the stuff that elephants do, they weren't surviving. And because they weren't surviving, they weren't reproducing. And then on the other hand, the ones that didn't have tusks, they weren't shot for their ivory, and they were the ones that reproduced. So we go to this one. There is variation. If I go back, 2 to 6% of elephants are born without tusks. Very small amount, but we still see variation. So in this example, we have elephants that have tusks and elephants that don't have tusks. So that's our variation there. Inheritance, not having tusks is something that is in the genes that can be passed on, and it was passed on from mother to offspring. Adaptations, so tusks are great. Elephants are going to use those all the time. Male elephants are going to use those to fight with each other. They're going to use them to knock down trees. They're going to use them to dig. Uh, Elephants are very important. Their tusks are very important for the environments that they're in too. So not having tusks seems on the surface not to be a good adaptation, but for that particular environment, it was crucial because they weren't being hunted for their ivory. So in that population, the reason that the elephants don't have tusks are because of humans. Humans were the pressure there, and if we look at lots of other animals, humans are one of the biggest pressures that animals have to deal with. And you're either going to that population is either going to have a way to adapt and evolve, or they're going to go extinct. And a lot of animals are going extinct because if we go back to what I was talking about over here, natural selection is very, very, very slow. Most animals, most plants are not going to be able to adapt quickly enough to deal with the changing environment. All right, I know that was kind of long, but it's a very cool topic that we'll keep on talking about. You have a short little quiz in Canvas that'll be connected right after this. Go ahead and take it. You can rewatch this if you need to. All right, talk to you guys later.